I've been trying to go sub 2 minutes in my Tesla at Buttonwillow for 2 years now, but the car keeps overheating and ruining it for me. Obviously, Teslas have issues on the racetrack, but one good thing is there's a ton of aftermarket support, which works together to solve these issues. One of those products is the Mountain Pass Performance Oil Cooler Kit, which adds direct cooling to the drive unit oil, which is the hottest part of the car. I bought one recently and took it to the track to see how it performs. So, installation. The oil cooler comes in a box. It's got the cooler, integrated fan, bracket hoses, and oil filter pickoff plate to redirect the oil. You might be wondering why there's oil in a Tesla, and it's actually more like transmission fluid. Internally, it lubricates the gears, and it also splits off to cool down the stator and the rotor. For an install, you'll need to source this transmission fluid yourself, and you should take the opportunity to do a full fluid flush and replace the oil filter while you're there. It took my shop an afternoon for the complete install and service. One annoyance is that there's no wiring harness provided. If you have the premium sound system, you can tap power from the rear amp, but I had to pull it from under the seat. It's basically the same as installing an aftermarket sound system, so it shouldn't be a problem for an installation shop. Once it's installed, it's all very discreet. There's just a small cutout for the fan exhaust. The only thing I noticed is I can hear the pump a little bit more loudly. The car is still in control of the oil pump, so it doesn't interfere with normal driving or supercharging at all. So obviously, I took it to the track to test it out. My car is a 2019 Tesla Model 3 SR Plus, which has the small battery but the performance rear motor. I'm using the EngineNext Boost module, and the rest of the car is basically the Mountain Pass performance catalog. It's a good test car since it only has the one motor to worry about, and less total demand on the battery. For the comparison, let's look at my normal track routine, which is every session I'll do a warm-up lap as I go out, then one fast lap to try to set a good time, and then I'll do a cool-down lap and try for another fast lap. After all that, depending on how long I have between sessions, I may just drive straight to the supercharger, charge back up, and repeat. I'm capturing data with Scan My Tesla, and I'm comparing sessions using my overheat meter, which tries to predict how much torque the car should be making, so you can see how much performance it's holding back. The graph is the same data as I put over my videos, with lines at the start-stop lines. The problems I found in my last video were, firstly, the car is already cutting power on the initial fast lap. There's cuts coming out of button hook, and especially going into the final straight. Stator temperatures climb quickly to 100 degrees Celsius within the lap, and they don't come down until after the lap is over. And oil temperature rises throughout. As I mentioned, the oil is what cools everything inside the motor, so it'll be interesting to see how that changes with the addition of the oil cooler. The second problem is on the cool down lap, the car doesn't actually cool down, so the second fast lap is always bad. The stator temperature returns to normal, but the oil, coolant, and battery just stay hot. You can see on the second fast lap, I'm getting cuts immediately and consistently. And third, I didn't mention this in the previous video, but when I'm supercharging in between sessions, the car heats itself up on purpose, and sometimes I can't get it to cool down all the way before the next session. So it looks like what happened here was the car actually kind of started out a bit hot. I couldn't get it cooled down all the way in the first place. So let's look at a lap with the oil cooler. The car is on the same software, same type of tire, and conditions were about the same around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't want to overlay this plot right on top of the other because it's not a controlled experiment, and that would be boring. I think if you have to get out a magnifying glass to see an improvement, it means the difference must have been really small anyway. So what I'm hoping is the cooler makes a big difference here. So let's look at the first fast lap. I think it felt a little better. The cut at button hook is maybe a little bit less, and In particular, I didn't feel a big cut going into the final straight. The temperatures are still basically doing the exact same thing though. The stator is going to the moon and staying there, and the oil temperature is actually still rising throughout this lap. Then on the cooldown lap, we have all the same problems. Everything gets hotter, only the stator gets cooler, and even the oil temperature goes up and doesn't come down. And that's a bit disappointing because I was hoping that the oil cooler would at least cool down the oil. You know, that's how it's supposed to work. So if I can't see a difference in the oil temperature, it's hard to imagine it making a difference anywhere else. As a side note, the stator temperature is actually kind of unimportant on its own, but it is the easiest temperature in the motor to measure. Not just for me, but also Tesla. They have a patent on how they estimate the rotor temperature based on the stator and other factors. And then thirdly, one improvement I did notice was in the starting temperatures. On this session, the car started off colder than the previous one we looked at. I don't have enough data from before these sessions to say that this was really a comparable setup, but at least in practice, I noticed it was easier to fully pre-cool the battery when using Mountain Pass's battery cooling box alongside the oil cooler. So overall, my thoughts are, I guess it felt a little bit better overall, but the car is still generating way more heat than the cooling system can handle. So even though it might be helping, it's not changing how you have to drive this car on the track. It's still a Tesla. It's a bit disappointing because I have a lot of other Mountain Pass products, like the battery cooling box, which completely changes how hot the battery gets on track, just because it starts out so much colder. I think that's a good comparison, since the biggest difference I can see between the two sessions was just the starting temperatures of the oil. I think the oil cooler helps with that, but the car is actively generating heat in the motor while supercharging. So the oil cooler basically becomes a hardware solution to what really should be a software problem. So anyway, I'm not going to sell the cooler or anything, but it's just not really worth it for this kind of marginal improvement in starting temperatures, especially for the price. Thanks to Mountain Pass for giving me a small discount in exchange for review, and especially for everything they've done pushing the Tesla tuning scene forward.